It's time for another homebrew video. I'm looking for something easy to make, but not quite as easy as one of these cans of Cooper's. I found this in Men's Health. It's a single malt and single hop pale ale. And I don't have as much Maris Otter as it calls for, because these cans of extract are only 3.3 pounds apiece, so I end up with 6.6 pounds. Whereas the recipe in Men's Health calls for more. And by the way, I'm going to convert all this into metric. So if I'm start talking in metric, that's why. Kind of like the metric better when I entered into Brewer's Friend and things like that. But I'm going to make up for the lack of Maris Otter by adding some dextrose. And I kind of want to do that anyway because as somebody, I think it was Vic, if you visit the 17 Brew Crew forum, said, I think it was Vic. Anyway, somebody said that if you don't use dextrose, then you end up with a beer that's a little bit sticky. And that's one way to put it. I think it's heavy is another way to put it. I just want to dry the beer out a little bit. So I'm going to be using some dextrose, about 500 kilograms. And so here we go. It calls for 4 ounces of Cascade. So one of these goes in at 60 minutes. 1.5 goes in at, right, so this is about 28.35 grams. 1.5 of these will go in at 10 minutes, and the other 1.5 will be in there for just 1 before it's cooled down. So that is the brew. Hopefully it's easy. Oh yeah, also the recipe, it calls for Y yeast, I think 1056. I'm sure I'm showing it in the corner there when I put this video together. But I'm going to use a Dan Star Nottingham instead. Why? Because I want it to be easy, so I don't want to have to make a starter. So there's plenty of yeast cells if you rehydrate that to try to, or in order to avoid using or having to use a starter. I'm also going to be very careful for the first time about my boil size, and I've never really cared before. I just sort of put water in there. But the person at the homebrew store that I was talking to about this, he told me that, well, he mentioned something about when he brews that he usually loses about 1 gallon of water. It's like, I thought, wow, I mean, I don't lose anywhere near that much. So I said, well, what do? You're leaving the lid off? And he says, yeah, you should leave the lid off because you end up with a little bit different tasting beer if you leave the lid on for some reason other than water boiling away. It's probably, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's something that evaporates out with the water that ends up dripping back in instead of evaporating away. But apparently he thinks that if you let that stuff boil away rather than dripping back in off the lid, that you end up with a better tasting beer. So I'm going to be watching my boil size, seeing how much boils off. Well, take a look right here. I just found this in John Palmer's How to Brew under Boiling and Cooling, same chapter as where he talks about yeast. Once you achieve a boil, only partially cover the pot, if at all. Why? Because there are sulfur compounds in wort that evolve and boil off. If they aren't removed during the boil, they will later form dimethyl sulfide, which contributes to a cooked cabbage or corn-like flavor in the beer. If the cover is left on the pot or left in such a way that the condensate from the lid can drip back in, then these flavors will have a much greater chance of showing up in the beer. And that's exactly what the guy said. Well, he mentioned the corn-like flavors, the guy at the homebrew shop. So that's 2 different people, him and John Palmer. Now let's take just a quick minute and marvel at these gloves. Somewhere it said on the package or in an advertisement or something that you can immerse your hand in boiling water if you're wearing one of these gloves and you'll be fine. And that's true. When I put these on, I can tell that the heat from boiling water would not get through immediately. It would take a little while. So that's what I've got in these cans is boiling water. Well, it was boiling. And I'm using it to rinse out the excess Maris Otter. I'm going to dump this one over here. into my kettle, and now let me point something out on this label here. It says malt extract containing a minimum of 67% Maris Otter. That's kind of a sad thing. I would have expected that it would be 100% Maris Otter. Got a nice vigorous boil, so now I'll just add the hops in. Alright, before I add my next hops, the 10-minute hops, it looks like I've got about 3 minutes left. So I'm just going to put in something a little bit irrelevant, and that's the beer I'm drinking right now. It's an Oktoberfest. It's from Salt City Brew Supply. I brewed it for 10 days in the primary at about 60 degrees. That's about 15 Celsius. And then in the secondary, it was 32 days at around 50 degrees. That's about 10 degrees Celsius. But what's really amazing to me is how clear this beer is. It just is, you can kind of see my face through it. You can kind of see how clear that is. And I know I used a Werflock tablet. Let's shine some light on me and look at my face through that. I'm just shining this flashlight on me. I don't think it does much good to do this. Everybody does this, but I don't know how much good that does. If it's doing anything for you to tell you how clear it is, fine. But I mean, you can see me fairly clear. Let's look at my eye. Look at that. Through the beer. So, I think that's what time does to it. I think it's that month that it's spent in the secondary, or maybe it's just in a secondary to begin with. I've never had these results from a Werflock tablet alone. Whirlflock! Jeez! Urgh. But that is some really clear beer. And I think it's awesome. So if you're looking for clear beer, maybe there's a suggestion there. This is some water that's been previously boiled. I just pulled this little baggie out of the Ziploc container with all the baggies in it. And now I'm going to seal it closed. Not much air in there. Now the point, you previously boil the water because you don't want any germs in there, number one. Number two, you want to boil out all the oxygen, or at least as much, you know, at least to boil out some of the oxygen. In fact, I'm going to remove a little bit more of this oxygen from there before I do what I'm about to do. There we go. A little less atmosphere. What am I going to do with that? I got this from John Palmer. It's in his How to Brew book. You fill a baggie up with water. You get it down to the right temperature, about 100 degrees Celsius, right? Not Celsius, my God, that'd be terrible. 100 degrees Fahrenheit. What is that, about, I don't know, 38 or something? I'm just kind of guessing at the moment. Celsius, but you get it down to a normal temperature that you're going to put yeast into. And then you sprinkle the yeast on top. Once you sprinkle the yeast on top, you don't mix it in, but you try to squeeze all the air out of the baggie. And then just let it sort of sit there and rehydrate very slowly for about 10 minutes. Or is it 15 minutes? I don't know. 10 or 15 minutes. After 10 or 15 minutes, then you kind of take your fingers and you mix it all in. And wait another 10 or 15 minutes. And that's about what I'm going to be waiting here for my wort to get done and my wort to get cooled, that total of 20 minutes. 20 or 30 minutes. And that's how to rehydrate the yeast. Alright, so the air has been squished out of the bag. And, well, first I put the yeast inside, and then I squished the air out of the bag. And it's just sort of slowly rehydrating a little bit. We'll wait maybe 10 minutes. Got my fermenter all sanitized. That's Star San in there. I'm going to have to dump that out. There's not much in there. Maybe a quarter cup. This I've got down to 28 degrees Celsius. I needed it at 34 degrees Celsius. So what I'm going to have to do is, after adding this 5-degree water, I'm not going to add all of it, maybe 2 gallons of it. I will then add, to top it off to 20 liters, this bit of filtered water here, which is at room temperature. And when I do that, it ought to be at right around 68 Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius, which is where I want it for the yeast to be pitched. You know, it just occurred to me that I forgot to add the dextrose in as a late addition. I don't do late additions very often, so I am just heating up to boiling 300 grams. I said I was going to use 500 grams, but I'm only going to use 300 grams because if I use 300 grams, it gets to be almost exactly 5% alcohol. 5.01, at least according to Brewer's Friends. So that is good enough for me. And as soon as I see some bubbles pop up from that, I will dump it into my wort, which is nice and safe and covered. Well, I star stand the heck out of this little scoop. Scooped some wort out into my cylinder here. It's supposed to be at 1.053. Let's see if we can zoom in on that. Yeah, it's a little hard to tell, but I think it's at about 1.049. So, it's going to be less than 5%, but I'm okay with that. I got the right temperature of water here, and I put the yeast, the bag of yeast inside there to get it at the right temperature. Now I'm about to star sand the heck out of the outside of this bag and down inside this little crevice here before I pour it. I'll pitch the yeast, and then it's a matter of waiting for it to ferment. So here's the batch right here. I've actually got two batches. This one I did a couple of days ago. It's a dry Irish stout. And it looks like it's either finished or the big mouth bubbler is leaking around the top. I think that's pretty much expected for big mouth bubblers. I've put 5-pound weights on both of them, which is usually enough. I'm not sure. Maybe that one's stopped. Who knows? This one here, this is the one from last night. It's been, I don't know, 14 hours, and it's going pretty good. I just added it to my kegerator. I've got about 30-35 pounds of pressure on it. Looks a little foamy. Alright, so the foam is mostly down enough that I can give it a whirl. Not really tasting much from the foam. Now Cascade, I guess. Well, I guess there's 3 characteristics of hops that I've seen. There's like a bitterness, flavor, and aroma. I don't catch much aroma from this. I think it seems like I just read that Cascade was a bittering and an aroma hop. No mention of flavor, but I think that there's a lot of flavor to this, and it's kind of citrusy. Not very much, though. Overall, it's a light tasting beer. Not very strong. There's a strange characteristic to it that I'm not accustomed to. I was expecting it to be kind of like a Pilsner or something. It is not particularly clear. And maybe I shouldn't expect the first glass out of a keg to be clear, because there's probably been some settling down at the bottom which made it up through the out tube and into my glass. But this has kind of a heavy characteristic, sort of. It's kind of a heavy flavor, which may be the Maris Otter. I don't think I've made a beer with Maris Otter yet. But it's an interesting preview of what's going to come with my next few batches. That's it for Maris Otter Cascade number 1.